it. I feel triggered by it, but it's also very normal. So how can I respond in a more effective way? So rather than yelling and punishing, I can be curious about why this behavior is occurring, and I can speak to the need or the want behind the behavior.
All right, welcome back everyone to the WebMD podcast. Thank you guys for tuning in today. I have a very special guest who's going to tell us all about the field of pediatric psychology and why she went into it and what a typical day in the life is like for her and some of the conditions that she treats and sees, and tell us all about the wonderful field of pediatric psychology. Dr. Lockhart, thank you for joining us today. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's a pleasure, and it's we were just chatting that about 4 years ago I actually had a video, and I sent my videographers out to your office to meet with you and just talk to you about your specialty and path, and but it's a pleasure to kind of finally meet you.
Yeah, ditto.
Yep, and tell the viewers out there kind of who you are and kind of what you do and kind of a little bit of your background.
Mm-hmm. So I'm a pediatric psychologist, which means it's the merging of medicine with psychology. And so my background is I got my doctorate in clinical psychology, and my residency or internship was with the military as a civilian and doing a lot of work just in general clinical psych in that setting. So I worked with the service members who had been deployed, people who had been injured, people in OIF, OEF, and blast injuries, those individuals. And then I also worked with their children. And then my fellowship was a 2-year pediatric child psychology fellowship, working with kids with cancer, sickle cell, end-of-life issues, gastrointestinal disorders, cerebral palsy. I mean, it was like 14 different interdisciplinary teams that I was a part of. So working with all ages in addition to the service members. And so that's where I got my ped psych focus and training. And then I stayed working with the military for 10 years, and I worked in a variety of settings. Primary care, I did a lot of sniper post-deployment evaluations. That was quite fascinating. Worked with geriatric population, I mean, all of it. And so just really loved the work that I was doing there. So, and in the past 8 years, I've had my own practice. It's called A New Day Pediatric Psychology, and I have a team of individuals, and we do parent coaching, we do life coaching, do therapy for children as young as 2 all the way up to older individuals. So I really love the work that I do. And then on the side, I do speaking, I do brand partnerships, collaborations with different agencies, that kind of stuff. So a little bit busy.
Yeah, I see. Very impressive. I'm pretty sure your schedule is jam-packed, and that speaks to even more thanks to you for taking the time to come speak with us. Going back to kind of your college time, when you were in college, did you know that this is something that you always wanted to do, or you just kind of had some shadowing experience and kind of came introduced to it?
Not at all. I mean, I meet people who really, since they were little, they wanted to be a psychologist, went to college, went for their master's or doctorate. And I was like, oh, that was not my path. So I'm originally from St. Croix in the Virgin Islands. And my senior year of high school, our island got hit by a Category 5. And it was the first time in 100 years we've been hit by that. And my family at the time had a business, a children's clothing store. So about 30 years at the time. And I always worked in the business. So I did buying trips, did the fashion merchandising, the display windows, all that stuff. So the goal that I had for myself, that I think was actually my family's goal for me, was to take over the business. Oh. So I went to college for marketing and fashion merchandising, but because we were homeless at the time, because my home was destroyed by this hurricane, we were really strapped in terms of what we could afford. And I only applied to 2 colleges, and I got in because I wrote a really great college essay about the experience, I had dengue fever. It was martial law, looting, all that kind of stuff. And so I got into college, although my grades were really terrible because I was not a really great student. And I did great. I thrived in college. College was for me. High school was not for me, but college I loved. And I started out with business and fashion merchandising. But after I took a first few classes, I'm like, this is not my thing. So I changed my major about 6 different times: political science, sociology, all kinds of stuff, like random. And my mom is finally like, okay, you have to graduate in 4 years. decide.
Yeah.
So I decided on psychology because it seemed cool,
Gotcha.
but not because I wanted to be a psychologist. I grew up on an island. We don't talk about problems. So,
Yeah.
so that wasn't part of the deal. And then I got my master's in college student personnel and worked in higher education. So I worked in admissions, career counseling, Greek life, rape education, all kinds of stuff. And worked in admissions was my last job. And then that's when I was working with a lot of high school students from a lot of situations that were really terrible for them. And I kept feeling like I needed to do something more. And I had met my husband at the time, and he encouraged me to get my degree and in counseling and psychology. So that's what I did. So it was a really long roundabout process, but I had been working for about 6 years in higher ed before I went back. So I was one of the quote older students in the class because I had been working outside of the field, in other areas. So I think having that real life experience really helps me decide what I wanted to do, and it made it more. It was a richer experience for me.
Yeah, and it's also something that you can relate to. A lot of patients that come in, they may have similar experiences from really troubling and very low kind of starts and backgrounds, and you're able to kind of relate to them. Truly success story coming from something like that to kind of a business owner and just being very successful. So that's congrats on that.
Thank you.
And how did you end up kind of with your time in the military? How did that come about?
Yeah, it was really cool. So I was applying for psychology internships, and I wasn't sure if I wanted to work with children because I had practicum experiences, training experiences in graduate school, working with kids who were severely abused, kids who were without homes, kids in an adjudicated last chance charter school system, like all kinds of really different situations. So I really liked that. But because of my experience in higher ed, I also liked college students. So I applied to college counseling centers, and I also applied to children's hospitals and that kind of stuff. And nothing quite felt right. And then the military was talking about how they were looking for more civilians to work in a military setting, serving the military service members and their children. I'm like, ooh, that's perfect kind of combination. And so that's how I got into it. Like it was more of working with all age groups, and also I had a lot of experience working alongside and getting this similar training as those who were active duty. So I was looking at the Navy, the Air Force, and then the Army, and I was looking at going into active service. But I felt like a lot of the information I was being given wasn't true, because the recruiters were telling me things like, oh, you could volunteer to deploy, or you'll just be on a sub for 9 months. And I was like, something's not. Yeah. So I decided, the best, probably just civil service. Let me do the residency and then see from there. And and so that's how I got involved. So our class was a mixture of active duty service members as well as civilians who were working with the military service members. So it was a really cool experience.
That's very interesting. I was in the military myself for 8 years in the U.S. Air Force, and never really knew that was an opportunity or something that was available to us. Yeah. In the military, especially when I was especially going overseas to Iraq and getting deployed, coming back, it was one of those things that they just it was. If you had issues or you were dealing with something, it was almost to a point where you didn't want to speak about it because you would think that it would affect your promotion and your ranking and things like that. So I dealt with a lot of issues coming back and PTSD and just from things that I saw in war, and then didn't talk about it, didn't just bottle it all up inside until, it actually did more harm than good. So I thank you for your service in terms of giving back to the veterans. I mean, I didn't know that was something that was offered by the military. So
and it's important because there's such a stigma because of that, right? Because a lot of these service members are afraid if I speak up, will I lose my rank? Will I lose my weapon? Will I lose the ability to get promoted? And it was really attempting to normalize that, you need help if you need help, and to really address it. And it was so fulfilling being able to help these service members with the challenges that they were having, and their family members, because of the burden of that. And especially because I worked with a lot of very sick kids. So then you had this balance of, okay, well, should I deploy? Should I stay? Can I get leave? How does this affect my career? And I'm also dealing with a child who's very ill, so it was a really, really great experience.
Yeah, awesome. And then transitioning from that to starting your own practice, how did that come about? And I'll tell you that when I was watching your video from a couple years ago that we did, I was really impressed by the amount of detail and thought that you put into your office space, from the lighting, from the colors to the arrangement of the chairs. You put so much thought into it, and I thought that was very unique and noteworthy. So
thank you.
But yeah, how did that come about with your practice? And you've been in practice for 8 years now, your own business. How did that come about?
So I was working, as I said, with the military for 10 years. I had various positions. I was in leadership role. I was like an acting chief at one point, and a training director for the fellowship. And it was great relationships, great everything. And then we had a new leader come in, and things got really bad. And I started experiencing a lot of workplace discrimination and a lot of workplace bullying. And it led to severe migraines and nosebleeds, as well as some severe depression from that. And my husband was like, you can't this is not right. And I remember one day I was playing with my son. He was about 2 at the time, I think. And my nose just started gushing, bleeding. Never had problems with the nosebleeds before. And he's like, Mama, that's not right. And I was like, you're right, that's not right. And I spoke to a really good friend who'd known me for a long time. And she's like, you need to make a change. So we did a girls' weekend one weekend. And she went through all the things that I would need to do to exit and how I would prepare for a new business. And she wrote it all up for me and helped me with an exit plan. And so I told them that I was leaving, gave them my 2 weeks notice. I think it was like a month notice, actually. They were surprised because no one leaves this GS system. And left in December, and my nosebleeds stopped within a week. Wow. And everything improved within about a week or two. And then I started my business a month later. And I just went on Wix, free website, developed my website, kept adding to it. I had no clue what I was doing, but I was saving forms and everything. This was back in 2015. And I, about 25 of my patients said they wanted to follow me. And so I started with 25 patients. That's awesome. I was able to work with them. And then on the side, had been doing traveling with another company, doing trainings for schools and agencies. So I traveled twice a month to do about 6-hour trainings a day. And then the other 2 weeks of the month, I would see clients. And within 6 months, I had a full practice and went from there. But what I started with was renting out office space 10 days a month with an agency, with a company. And I would bring in my stuff and then take it. And then as I had more people, then I could have more permanent space. So then once I had the more permanent space, I found a sublet from another therapist. And then as I grew, I just started increasing the space that I had. So the place that I'm at now, I've basically been there for most of the time that I've been in practice. And I just move into a larger space each time.
Yeah.
So it was really kind of looking at that. And then I developed my brand colors. I developed my name. My kids helped me with the brand colors, and looking at the psychology of color and what is more soothing to people. And I really based my space. I didn't want it to feel institutional or hospital-y. I wanted to feel like a home when people came in. And so that's why I was intentional with the office layout and where the toys were and the music that was playing and all that kind of stuff, because I wanted people to come in. And like a lot of the kids ask me, do you live here? Because it looks like a house. It looks like a home. And so that was all the intentionality behind it. And because of my background with design and everything, doing that kind of stuff, then I was like, yes, I want people to come in and feel like, it doesn't feel like there's something wrong with me. I'm messed up. I feel like I'm at my house, basically. Yeah. So, yeah. Yeah,
that's really interesting. That's incredible. Going from a GS kind of guaranteed paycheck, a lot of stability in your job, and then just taking that leap of faith to starting your own practice. I'm pretty sure that had to be pretty nerve-wracking for you, and also scary just to go out and start your own practice without any experience whatsoever. How was that process for you?
Terrifying. People were, when I was out processing, people were like, so what's the next plan? I'm like, I think my practice. And they're like, so you're leaving a GS 14 to go out on your own?
Yeah.
And I'm like, yep. I mean, so it was scary. And you're guaranteed great medical benefits, a stable salary, all of these things. But I'm like, but it's not worth it. I'd been going through this for a year and a half. I was sick. I was losing myself. My husband's like, I'm losing you. You are a different person. And I kept going up the chain to try to resolve things, and it wouldn't be resolved because their solution was, well, you can always leave or you can move departments. And I'm like, that's your solution? Can you not address the issues that are going on? And so it was horrible. It was really horrible for me because I felt like I was losing something because it was such an important part of my life. And I was there for 10 years, and a lot of people there were friends. And but the environment became very toxic and it wasn't healthy for me. So yes, it was terrifying. But my goal was, you know what, I'm going to, people say businesses fail within the first 5 years. I totally understand that. But my goal was within the first 6 to 12 months, I was going to have a full practice and I was going to replace my salary. And within the first year, I replaced my salary.
That's awesome. Yeah. And there's so many other people out there that may be in similar situations and have no idea what to do or kind of just don't have the confidence to just take that leap of faith. What would you say to people out there that are maybe in a similar toxic work environment and just it's affecting their health because you're having nosebleeds, you're depressed. I mean, your spouse is kind of noticing that. Mm-hmm. What would you say to those folks? Yeah, I mean, it's hard to take a leap of faith, especially when you're relying on your income. And the thing I would tell people is have a plan, have an exit plan. Find people who support you and can really look at, even if it doesn't even feel realistic, like what do I need to do to leave? Do I need to get more education? Do I need to get more training? Do I have to get more connections? What do I need to do? And do that. So whether it's a business coach, whether it's a friend, whether it's your partner, your spouse, but having a plan and action. Don't just leave. Don't be like, I'm out, peace. Like you have to have an action plan and an exit plan, because if not, then you're going to be more miserable. And for me, I went through major grief because it was a huge loss for me because I had loved that place so much. And so I think you also have to give yourself space to grieve. And because it is to lose something like work when you're spending so many hours there is a big deal. So be very intentional and look at, I always talk to clients about this as well too, is look at what you value, and the things that you value will guide you. So when like people reach out to me, for example, and say, hey, I want to be a psychologist too. What do I need to do? I'm like, well, you have to think about what is it that you value, because there's so many different areas of psychology. So do you value giving back to your community? So do you do more social psych? Do you value knowledge and education? So maybe you want to go into developmental psychology and teach others. Like, what is it that you value? So really looking at what are your values and what makes you light up, what motivates you, because then when you do work like that, you won't feel so exhausted and so drained. So yeah, I would say definitely have a plan and definitely have people who can support you in the process, and then writing down those things. Like, where do you want to be in 6 months? Where do you want to be in 12 months? What is your salary look like? What does your ideal client look like, for example, if you're going into that? What does your ideal work environment look like? And I had told myself, I want to work 3 days a week. I want to be able to have a 2-hour lunch break on those days. Nice. And I want to be able to sleep in if I need to, or not have to go in at the crack of dawn, because I don't vibe with early hours. And then to be able to also continue doing speaking and maybe do some brand collabs. Like I had that. So now I work Monday through Wednesday, 9:30 to 4:30. I have my 2-hour lunch break. Okay. And then Thursdays is my admin day, or doing things like creating content, that kind of stuff, or speaking. And then like Thursdays as well and Fridays are things where I could do things like this. So doing speaking, doing traveling, doing other things with other companies and agencies. So that way I front load my stuff with the clients that I see, and then I can also at the end also do the things that I love and enjoy. So yeah, definitely have a plan, because in that way you can fulfill those things without just like going without a purpose. You need to have a purpose and a direction you're going into. Yeah. And did that inspire the name of A New Day, kind of your time in the military and leaving that to starting your practice? Is that what inspired that?
So getting the name was funny because I didn't know what name I wanted. And I was listening to, I grew up in the 80s. So I was listening to all kinds of like 80s stuff. And I'm like, ooh, Breathe Again, Toni Braxton. Maybe that could be the name. Or there was another song. I was like, maybe like Jar of Hearts. People were like, that's ridiculous. That's dumb. That's a dumb name. But I was like, okay, what am I trying to, what do I want clients to feel? What do I want them to think about in terms of their healing process? And what kept coming to me is making things new, to be restored, that all things are new, all things are made better. And so I was like, yeah, every day is a new day. And I'm like, I like that. I like that. It really felt like it vibed with me. And then I was thinking of a sun because, every day is a new day. And so the sun seemed fitting. So I was looking at, my daughter loved blue and orange at the time. And I really love blue because of that the sky, this orange of the sun. So those are the brand colors, is the blue, white, and orange. And so that's the direction I went in because of that.
Yeah, and you mentioned that the color of psychology. What is that? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So when you look at design and color and all that stuff for the design world, as well as with your mental health, there's certain colors that seem to exude different emotions. So, for example, red is a great color for restaurants or a kitchen because it increases your appetite. But you wouldn't want to put it in a bedroom because that's not the calm that you want. It's not going to give you that. Or colors of nature, like they have the green room before you go on a talk show because of the color of nature, the green grass, green trees, blue skies, because blue is more of a calm color, more of a calming color. So a lot of that kind of stuff. I didn't know a ton about it, but I did know that there are certain colors that tend to exude more of a sense of certain feelings than others. And I wanted to see what color I wanted to move towards. So, so that's where I was going with that. And I really wanted to let's repeat that color over and over again. And that's why I did that in the office as well. So that way the brand colors are also within the office space as well.
Yeah, very interesting. Can you talk about some of the conditions that you see or the patients? You mentioned kind of seeing as early as 2 years old. How does that work with a 2-year-old and seeing a psychologist? For the people that have no idea, or I wouldn't even think of this bringing my 2-year-old. I have a 2-year-old myself, and to just have that insight to just, hey, I'm going to go have him see someone for some condition. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I have several staff members and team members in my practice, and I don't see little kids anymore. I see them about age 15 and up at this point. But I have team members who see the little ones. So the little ones, what we focus more on is play therapy. And play therapy is important because that's a child's language. And so really from age 2 until about 10 or 11, that's what we're going to focus on is play therapy. And so what that basically means, it sometimes looks like, okay, well, my kid just played with you for 50 minutes, but it's very intentional and there's a lot of research behind it. So for example, there's cognitive behavioral therapy, and cognitive behavioral therapy for adults is really looking at how your thoughts, your emotions, and your feelings impact your behaviors for change. And you can do cognitive behavioral play therapy to help a child with the same thing. So if they're going through a loss, anxiety, depression, separation anxiety, school anxiety, peer, social anxiety, any of that kind of stuff, those same concepts apply, and we just apply that to the play setting. So for example, we may have a kid come in and we read a book about worries, and that's bibliotherapy. That's part of that. Or telling a story that uses metaphors, because metaphors gets past the resistance. That's why so many kids' cartoons deal with the metaphors and really not giving things a message head on. You're doing it through the symbolic messages. Or they might play in a dollhouse and play out their fears and then find a solution through that play. Or doing sand tray and burying things and having things be rediscovered. It's quite fascinating. There's a whole bunch of research related to all types of play therapy depending on the problem. So kids as young as 2, 3, 4, 5 can do therapy through play because they process things that way. And it's amazing how you can see the change and the healing just from doing that when it's done right.
And hence the kind of setup of your office and your setting where you're seeing them. What kind of conditions are patient or families bringing their kids in at 2, 3, 4, and 5? What's the most common ones?
So the most common ones are probably things related to behavioral issues and anxiety probably are the most common. So behavioral issues like tantrums, meltdowns, getting into fights at school, being kicked out of daycare, kindergarten, where the families feel like they're a hostage in their home, like they can't do anything without triggering their child or having them hit a sibling. So a lot of that kind of behavioral stuff, we see a lot of that. A lot of ADHD type behaviors, so kids who are dysregulated or showing signs that they may develop ADHD, and with the impulsivity, with the hyperactivity, always on the go, wearing out their family, doing things without thinking, so they're extremely impulsive. And then a lot of the anxiety, because a lot of kids who are that age, they're pandemic kids. They were born in isolation. They were not in school for many years. And so a lot of them are having a hard time transitioning to, when a lot of them are now going back to school, for example, and a lot of them are having a hard time with being around other kids. They don't get these loud people, and why are you coming close to me, and leave me alone, and I don't want to share. So a lot of them are having a lot of social issues, and they don't know how to not be on screens. So a lot of them are very dysregulated. So we're seeing a lot of those kinds of behaviors for that age group, like a lot. It's pretty common.
And how do you separate, 2-year-olds? They're going to have some tantrums. They're going to not want to share their toys. They're, very active. How do you separate that to a point where a parent is like, hey, I need to maybe take my child in to maybe get evaluated because this is too excessive?
Yeah, great question. Because I think we're in this position of over pathologizing. Everything is now a disorder, right?
Yeah.
And we don't want to do that because that's dangerous, and these stigma behaviors or diagnoses can stick with your kids. So the way I look at it is, if a behavior starts to cause clinically significant impairment in multiple areas of functioning. So basically, if you have a child who is very active, well, kids are supposed to be active.
Yeah.
They're supposed to be loud and immature and moving around a lot. But is it impacting them being able to be in daycare and school, where most of the other kids are able to manage their emotions and their behaviors, and this kid is continually having disagreements and fights and pushbacks and not able to separate from you, and your family agenda is always being messed up because this kid cannot control themselves consistently. Because I think it's about 75% of 2 to 4-year-olds have tantrums. It's normal. Like, they're supposed to have them, but it's supposed to be resolved within 10 minutes. Like, they're supposed to have them, and then they're not supposed to have them anymore. So if you have a child who these tantrums are beyond the 10-minute mark, they're going into an hour, or they're always simmering all day long, and everything can kind of trigger them and send them over the edge, that's beyond what is typical. Or it might be that the parent's response to the child is causing a lot of these behavioral issues. And that's where I see a lot of parents blaming themselves. So like, oh, well, I'm a bad parent. No, you're not a bad parent. Maybe you're just not responding to the child in an effective way. Maybe the way you respond or discipline or direct them doesn't match the way that their personality or temperament needs, and you're overreacting. Lots of parents do a lot of old school ways of parenting that's overly punitive, and a lot of these kids who are on edge don't respond well to that. So the spanking, the timeout, the yelling, all of that will send these kinds of kids over the edge. And it's harmful to them as well, too. So I think that's where you have to look at, okay, how is this behavior typical, and where is it going beyond typical? That it's like, okay, other kids in their class are able to function. What is going on with my kid that they can't even sit for more than 5 minutes, or they can't take in the information, or every day is a meltdown in the home? So you have to look at, where is it becoming more than normal?
Yeah, and that's where I guess where a lot of people kind of talk about this. I don't believe in this, but this terrible twos.
Yes.
Because I do believe a lot of their behavioral is normal, and kids, they just do a lot of times just want attention. We're so connected to our phones, or we're constantly on our phones looking down and not giving our kids the time and the support that they need. And I think that does play a huge role. But what are your thoughts on kind of that word terrible twos?
Yeah, I used to use it, and then terrible threes, because then it changed. I was like, when did this change? When I had my own 3-year-old. I think that really starts to frame in a parent's mind that this is normal, and they need to just put up with it and suffer with it. And I think it also projects a lot of opinions onto your child. And I think that can be harmful. So, because just like when people say, oh, teenagers are terrible and, they always are moody. And I think that we have to stay away from some of those terms, because then we sometimes normalize it and think we are supposed to suffer through it when there's support, and maybe there's a different way that you can respond to your child. So yes, I get that it happens, and I've used it myself, and I totally get it, and I think people have to realize that between the ages about 3 to 6, and then again at 14 to 16, there is significant growth and development and synapses happening in the brain. Lots of those ages, why 3 to 6-year-olds and 14 to 16-year-olds look so similar, is because these surges in their brain growth and development and developmental stage of being independent and I'm my own kind of person, they're going to separate from you. They're going to push back, and that's normal. And so I think if we can understand childhood development and adolescent development, then we'll know, like, okay, this stage, highly annoying. Do not like it. I feel triggered by it, but it's also very normal. So how can I respond in a more effective way? So rather than yelling and punishing, I can be curious about why this behavior is occurring, and I can speak to the need or the want behind the behavior. Because that's the problem that I think a lot of us as parents have, including myself. We see the behavior on the surface, and we think we have to lecture the heck out of it, nag it, punish it, that kind of stuff. And we don't realize that there's things going on behind it. So we see a kid who's having a tantrum. Well, maybe they're having a tantrum because they're in pain. Maybe they can't see or hear. Maybe they're feeling attacked at school. Maybe they feel sad. Maybe they don't feel connected to you. Maybe they feel hungry or sleepy, or they're afraid of missing out, or their sibling isn't playing with them the way they want them to. And so we pay attention to the behavior on the surface, and then we miss out on, okay, what's really going on? And that's what you speak to. That's what you address. Because then when you can say that, you wanted to play with your big brother and he didn't want to play with you too. I know you're bummed out by that. Then what you're doing is you're not saying, stop, hush up, I'll give you something to cry about. We're not saying that. We're really addressing that and really helping the child feel seen and heard, which is a new thing for most parents. Most parents did not get that.
Oh,
and
I
so
definitely
it's foreign to them. They're like, oh, that's just soft parenting. That's not even realistic. But that's what kids need. And honestly, when I meet with a lot of adults in therapy, most of what they talk about are those unmet needs from when they were a kid, right? So that stuff stays with us. And I think we keep thinking, oh, just suck it up and it's not a big deal. Well, it obviously is a big deal, because those things do stick with people. So we have to, if we want to do things differently and break cycles, we do have to parent differently.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I just think back to my childhood and my grandmother doing something like that, going to the store, or, having a tantrum, yelling, screaming, which as a kid, you can't really express yourself or let others know exactly what you need in that moment. And I would have got a spanking. I would switch, got something thrown at me, which I've really come around to respect my wife, who does a great job at that. And she has taught me to be more patient and be understanding, and just try to figure out, they're crying and they're throwing a tantrum, or they're acting a certain way because of something, they have an unmet need. But I think validating their feelings, like you said, and I think that's a great way to at least attempt to understand what they're going through. What kind of tips would you have for those parents? Because I'll be honest, I definitely struggle with that when my kid is having a tantrum and he's going for 10, 15 minutes. Sometimes I don't know what to do. I've gotten a lot of spankings growing up. Me and my wife, I haven't really spanked my kid over, I have one that's 2, one that's 5. There's a couple times where I wanted to come close to it, but I just don't think that's a really effective way of kind of, if a kid is telling you that, hey, I need something, and then you spank him, I don't think that's the right thing to do. But everybody's their own parent and make their own decisions in terms of how they parent. But I guess my question is, what kind of tips and advice can you give for parents out there that may be in those situations? What can they do in that time?
Yeah. I think first, what's important for parents is to realize that they're doing the best that they can with what they know, right? And I think the next part is to regulate yourself, to calm yourself first. Because if you start to parent or discipline out of parental dysregulation or anger, you're going to make a bad decision and you're going to regret it later, okay? And so having a sense of calm, because tantrums, why they're so irritating to us, is because they're messing up our nervous system. They're causing us to go into fight, flight, freeze, or fawn response. And there's this movie that my husband and I saw years ago. I think it was called Vivarium. And the beginning of the movie was so weird because there were these eggs in this nest, and one of them was really large. And I was like, that's weird. And this large egg was hatched along with these other small eggs. So this baby bird was huge, and he was chirping, chirping, chirping. And the mother bird came, but the mother bird was significantly smaller than this big old baby bird. And then he pushed the other baby birds out of the nest. And I was like, what is going on? And what it was, I looked it up, and I is it the cuckoo bird or the mockingbird? One of those. What happens is these mother birds lay eggs in other birds' nests. Ah. And they make other birds raise their own bird. But what happens is that because you have this big old bird in the wrong nest, he is chirping and chirping and chirping, and because of his chirping, it makes other birds tend to him because they don't want to hear the noise. And so even in the animal kingdom, animals don't want to hear babies crying and whining. It is a visceral response we get that we want to shut it up. Here's your worm. Yep. Okay. So if we understand that, we also have to understand when kids are whining and crying and tantruming, we don't like it either. Our nervous system is like, what the heck? I need to stop it, which is why people go to yelling and spanking. Yep. The problem, though, is that spanking and hitting children has been shown to cause psychological and emotional damage. It is harmful to kids. What people have then substituted with is yelling, and yelling is just as harmful, just on a different level. And so we have to move away from that because it does cause a lot of dysregulation in a child. So I think, okay, understanding from a developmental perspective, understanding that it's really getting to us, we have to regulate ourselves. And then again, you notice the need. Once a tantrum happens, there's very little you can do to stop it. And that's what you have to accept. Once a kid is in full-blown tantrum mode, you have to ride it through.
You have to wait it out.
You got to wait it out. Good. Because the way you stop a tantrum is before the tantrum. Or you process it after the calm has happened. But in the middle of it, that is the worst time. Because the tantrum is, I have this want and you're not giving it to me. I asked for a peeled banana and you gave me a sliced. They don't have to be rational. Kids are irrational and immature, okay? We, in our adult logic brain, we're like, dude, you literally asked for a peeled banana, right? That's not what the issue is about. And parents fall into the trap of speaking logic into emotion. When children are emotional, emotion and logic processed in the brain are at war. And once emotion gets triggered, positives or, quote, negative emotions, logic doesn't work. So it's the same reason why a kid runs across the street, because it's fun. Did you know you could have been hit? That's logic. They weren't thinking about that. They were thinking, it's fun to run away from mom. It's the same reason why teenagers drive while drunk, because it's fun. But it's also the same reason why a tantrum happens, because I feel angry. And so now I'm having this tantrum, and you're like, you could have just asked daddy for another one. This is what you asked for. Those are all logical explanations. So we have to remember that once the tantrum happens, there's very little you can do. You got to write it out and you have to regulate yourself. And then once the calm happens, that's where the teachable moment happens. Before it happens, that's where the teachable moment happens, because we're building skills and we're building habits, developing habits. Those are what we're doing every time. Hitting, spanking, yelling do not create habits, and they don't create skills. Yep. It just makes you feel better because you shut up your kid, but it's not really helping at all. And so a lot of it is really helping your child through this stuff. So you tell them in advance, hey, you want a banana? Do you want it peeled or sliced? Oh, you want sliced? Okay, mommy's going to slice it for you. So you're using the words. They start to have a tantrum. You're like, oh, you're very upset that you didn't get exactly what you wanted. That makes sense. And then you drop it, you leave it. They want to have a tantrum, have a tantrum, keep them safe, make sure they don't fall out of their high chair. But then afterwards, then you comfort them, you provide them whatever, and then you talk to them through that. You asked me for the slice, not for the peel, whatever it is. Yeah. But a big part of it is the parental self-regulation, because they are irritating, and they're supposed to be, which is why they do it, because it gets their needs met. Birds do it, right?
Yeah. It's definitely challenging when kids yelling, screaming, and then you've had a long day at work, and a lot of other things are piling up. So I can see why a lot of families or individuals from certain communities that may not have the resources or even the knowledge to just think about that, and they go straight to spanking, yelling, screaming, cursing, and then it just leads to this whole cycle of events, this kind of generational curse. Can you talk a little bit about how that affects individuals going into their adulthood, being in environments like that?
Oh, yeah. So there's this research that was done in the 1990s about adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs. And what was found was that there's up to 10 adverse childhood experiences that can impact people for a lifetime. Wow. And not just their mental health, but their physical health, including, I believe it's early death of 20 years or something like that. And so these areas are things like coming from a home where there's a divorce, where there's domestic violence, abuse, physical, sexual neglect, incarceration of a parent, mental illness of a parent, homelessness. So there's several areas. And when you have 4 or more of these 10 adverse childhood experiences, you're more likely to have mental health issues yourself. Wow. You're more likely to have hypertension, a lot of chronic medical conditions, pain, post-traumatic stress, depression, anxiety, repeating those cycles as well, again, in your own life. And they've also found in this area called epigenetics that because it sits on top of the gene, so we know that we inherit things like eye color and hair color and skin color, but you also inherit other things related to these adverse childhood experiences. So when people say things like, oh yeah, alcoholism runs in my family, well, that doesn't make any sense. That used to not make sense to me. What do you mean alcohol runs in your family? Like, that's not like eye color, but that's the epigenetic piece. That's why there are things like that get passed on. And that's why this new generation is trying to learn these things. So they're like, oh my gosh, like, look at this. I come from a history of people divorcing at an early age, or teenage pregnancies, or that's epigenetics. And so when we understand that stuff, then we learn that stuff does carry. Whenever I see adults, it's amazing how many of their current mental health or medical issues are tied to their childhood because of unresolved things, feeling unwanted, feeling neglected, being abused, alcoholism, domestic violence, being unhappy, feeling rejected by a parent. All of those things people take with them. And then they're like, oh, I'm never going to be like that. And then they repeat it. So there are people that I find that we tend to respond in one of two ways. We either try to be nothing like our parents, or we want to be just like our parents. Yeah. And what ends up happening is sometimes people, even if they don't want to be anything like their parents, they end up being just like that, or marrying, quote unquote, someone who's like their parent. Yeah. They're like, oh, I married my dad. What is up with that? I didn't even like that he hit me and my sister, and that he was alcoholic and he was abusive and all that kind of stuff. And then they end up marrying that same kind of guy in their life. And that's the epigenetic piece of it, that even when we are aware, sometimes we get drawn to that because psychologically we're trying to correct those wrongs from our past. That if I marry a guy who's so busted like my dad, then maybe I could change him and make things different. But people have to remember, well, you're not your mom and that's not your dad. That's the past. That already happened. But we tend to engage in this kind of compulsion to repeat things from our past to make it better. And I see that so much. Almost every adult I see, they're dealing with that same kind of issue. Like everyone. So I think people have to realize that we are constantly doing things on a very unconscious level. And then even once we're aware, we have to be very intentional. And so the one thing that I teach a lot of my clients is, okay, something is happening and you hear something, you see it on the surface, and then you start to have a interpretation about it. Okay, so I cleaned the kitchen and then I, worked on this for 2 hours, cooked, cleaned up again, and then my husband came in and put a spoon in the sink. He doesn't respect me. Yeah. Okay, so you can say to yourself instead, okay, I put so much effort into this kitchen. What I'm telling myself when my husband puts the spoon in the sink is he doesn't respect what I've done. But that doesn't mean that's what he meant. That means that's what I'm telling myself. So then you got to check in and say, hey, I really spent a lot of time cleaning the kitchen. I didn't really appreciate you just leaving the spoon in there. So that way you're not telling yourself different messages than what's being observed. Maybe he doesn't respect you, or maybe he just didn't think about it because he was oblivious to it. You didn't realize how much time you spent. And so I think so often we're giving ourselves all these messages, and the same thing with parenting. Oh, my kid, he had a tantrum for an hour. He doesn't even respect women, or he's going to grow up to be a psychopath. Or what is this going to be when he's 18 and he's hitting girls because he hit his sister? Like, we have a lot of these messages that we tell ourselves, and we have to stop that because it's projecting a lot of stuff that may not be actually accurate.
Yeah, very true. And I always wonder about kind of the socioeconomic part, just including diet, the way that we're eating, and how does that affect kind of these conditions. What are your thoughts on that?
I don't know much about that, but I know that from some of the research that I looked at, people are always talking about, the gut-brain axis, right? And how so much of our food is nutrient deficient, and how people aren't getting what they need, and how so many more things are processed, and how people eat differently in different parts of the world. And I've experienced it myself when I've gone overseas, and how I feel differently when I eat the different food. My daughter and we took a girls' trip with some family members in January to Switzerland. We spent 2 weeks there, and I have never felt as not bloated. I was not bloated once. I felt healthy. I felt energized, and then came back to America, and I'm like, wow, this is now I can't eat pasta anymore in America. Yeah. Over there, I was tearing up some pasta, had no problems. So I think there's a lot of issues with our food system, and it has to impact us in some way, because food is fuel. And if we're fueling our body with the wrong stuff, it's going to impact our health and our mental health. So I think that's something to definitely look more into.
Yeah, I felt the same way going to Italy last year, and you could tell a difference in the food. You just don't feel bloated. You don't you don't have these same feelings that when you eat the food here in the U.S. So I definitely think that has a lot to say about what we're eating and how that kind of affects our overall well-being, as well as our mental space as well. Social media, and it's a huge topic these days, and cell phone use. I think the American Academy of Pediatrics, they recommend no more than 2 hours per day.
That's correct.
Okay.
For 2 to 18.
2 to 18?
Yeah, for ages 2 to 18.
Okay. Yeah. If they're under 2, they can have a little bit more?
They shouldn't have any.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah, that's true. I'm pretty sure you've seen this kind of evolve over your time in practice and your career. Can you talk a little bit about social media and its impact on our overall well-being, the children, and all the conditions that you treat? Yeah.
I think I love and hate social media. So I think social media is amazing, the connections that people are able to make, the way that you can impact your business. Most of my referrals come from Instagram. In my practice. A lot of partnerships I have came from Instagram. So I have partnerships with Meta and Instagram. So I think Instagram could be and social media can be really great, but I also think we have to, as parents, make sure that we're introducing it and allowing it at the right age. So I think for kids, the American Academy of Pediatrics says no more than 2 hours per day for 2 to 18-year-olds. That's painful for a lot of individuals as parents, because it's a great babysitter, honestly. And for lots of kids, because they can knock out 2 hours in no time, really. And especially during the pandemic, so much of learning was occurring online. And so many kids had nothing else to do. There was no sports, there was no movies, there was no traveling, there was no getting together with friends. And many of them got drawn into that world because of that. So I think that as parents, we need to make sure that social media is being introduced at the right time. For most of the platforms, they say not younger than 13. Other people on a very clinical, practical level, they say it should not be younger than 8th grade, like 14, 15. And also when they're on their parental control apps need to be brought in. So when kids are on any devices, whether they're not on social media or not, but they're on the iPad or their tablet, their computer, their cell phone, there needs to be some kind of parental control app so that they're not just on there and that there's no way of monitoring what they're on or who they're friending or what they're looking at. So I think that we have to be very vigilant about that, because there's so much harm coming as a result of that. And yes, social media companies are responsible for that, but parents are also responsible for what their kids are watching and what they're being exposed to as well. So I think that what I do is, when I talk to parents and teenagers about it, is really trying to educate them on what it is that they like to be on and why. And then also being very intentional about the stuff that they're on. So I think things like TikTok and YouTube are more harmful for kids because the algorithm is amazing.
Yep.
And it's continually feeding you stuff. And so you can click down this rabbit hole of then what am I watching kind of thing. And really helping kids be more intentional. So if they are, teenagers to be more intentional. So if they are on those platforms saying, okay, what am I going to be looking at today? How long am I going to be spending? What am I looking at specifically? Oh, is this inappropriate? I need to make sure that I don't look at this stuff. But that takes a lot of self-control, and a lot of their brains are not ready for that because they want to look at it. It's what draws them in. So yeah, I think that parents need to be very intentional about that and make sure that their teens aren't being exposed to this before they're ready, especially for those who get drawn into it because all of their brain cells are hitting and dopamine is like, ooh, this looks good. And they're not going to limit that time. And parents need to have a good discussion with their teens about it.
Yeah, that's very true. I just remember growing up, we were always outside until the street lights came on. And, I think a lot of kids these days, just on their phones all day and on social media. And I think it definitely has an impact in kind of the whole mental space. But I wanted to ask you, what are your thoughts about kind of social media use and it's becoming more prevalent with a lot of like ADHD, anxiety, depression, and what has been your experience with that? Yeah,
with ADHD, it makes a lot of sense. Why? Because a lot of their it's a dysregulation disorder. And so dysregulation is not just about attention or inattention. It's also about hyperfocus because it's dysregulated. So social media is perfect for ADHD kids, right? Because you never know what you're going to see. There's something that's more exciting the next time you click on it or look at it or like it or explore it some more. And so it feeds their brain constantly. And if they're moving towards this hyper focus, they can lose, and plus they have time blindness. So they can lose so much time and not realize how much time they've spent on it. And it's very stimulating for them. And that's why they like a lot of online gaming, why they like YouTube, why they like TikTok, because those things are always feeding their brain. And that dysregulation part of their disorder loves it. And so really understanding that if you have a kid with ADHD, a teen with ADHD, social media conversations and limits really need to be set because they will get lost in the apps. With anxiety and depression, for depression, a lot of the social media stuff makes sense because there's lower energy, there's lower interests, there's less of a desire to be social and to engage with the world. And so they get lost in their own world. And social media is perfect because they can live out this imaginary world or feel connected in a way that although they're disconnected. But the problem with that is that being on social media too much when you're depressed actually breeds more depression because you see all the things you're missing out on, all the things that you wish you could have done, and how cute I could look if I just left the house, and why didn't I do this, and all these things that I'm not engaging in life. And so that actually makes depression worse. And there's been a lot of studies that have shown that. For anxiety, the same thing. It's that fear of missing out, that FOMO, that look at all these friends and what they're doing, or what's wrong with me, or a lot of these messages being fed about anxiety and that I'm broken or bruised in some kind of way, I'm defective. So for self-esteem, anxiety, depression, all that kind of stuff are really, and eating disorders, body image, all of that stuff are negatively impacted and made worse by social media if it's consumed in the wrong way. So with I have a 12 and a 14-year-old, they are not on social media. And what we talk about a lot is I show them social media, but curated content, which means I save reels and different videos that I think they'll like in a whole separate folder. And at the end of the week, I screen share it to our TV. And we spend an hour to 2 hours looking at different reels, videos, quotes, animal stuff, all kinds of stuff, but curated, which means I've intentionally saved it for them. And occasionally they'll be like, ooh, this guy's funny. Let's look at more of his content. And then we'll click on it and we're like, oh, okay, that's why we didn't do that. And so now they realize just because you may like a page doesn't mean all of it is okay. Yep. So really trying to help them train their brain into how to be intentional about it, because it's really tempting to go off the rails with it. Yeah.
I bet. That's some great advice. What advice do you have for parents that are pretty hesitant to bring their kids in for psychological help or just to have some therapy. It was this huge stigma around it. To be honest, the first male Black kind of celebrity figure that I saw who spoke out about mental health was Charlemagne the God. He's a radio host. So it really kind of encouraged me to, seek out help for my own problem. Everybody has things that they're dealing with, and I think it's good to talk to someone. What advice do you have for the parents out there a little bit hesitant to get help?
Yeah, I think that it's normal that people feel that way. There's been lots of our communities who have been negatively impacted by mental health providers and professionals. So it makes sense because from a historical perspective, psychiatrists and psychologists have not been good to many groups of people. And then in addition to that, also knowing that things have changed and there are more people being represented across the board, and that to find someone who feels like a good match for you, that you, just as they are out there, you need to be able to find the person that's right for you. Also, just as you would seek out medical help, medication, surgery with a medical doctor for something that's chronic or acute, it's the same thing with mental health. We are mind, body, spirit. And so we can't separate our mental health from our physical and spiritual health, because if we're saying like, oh yeah, I know that I have hypertension, I know how I have that, and maybe depression or anxiety is making it worse, but I'll just deal and get my, blood pressure medication and call it a day. Well, I think we also have to look at, there's also the mental health piece. And I remember in primary care, when I worked with the Air Force, and I worked in their primary care clinic, and I saw a lot of people, it was so awesome to be able to see people who are pre-diabetic or pre-hypertensive and give them solutions that were actually behavioral health oriented, and then actually prevent them from developing these things. So someone who's pre-hypertensive and teaching them belly breathing, to exercise, to watch their amount of things that they're putting in their life that's creating that stress, or someone who's pre-diabetic and helping them create behavioral change. That's all mental health. So I think we have to destigmatize it by looking at like, no, I deserve to treat my whole body, my whole system to impact everything. Because if one thing's off balance, everything is off balance. So it's the same thing with our kids. We want to destigmatize it because a lot of these kids don't see the stigma like the adults do. And if they have it, it's because of the parents or the adults in their life that have given them that idea of the stigma. So I think that it's important to deal with things sooner than later and to be able to normalize it for our child. So if they're having issues with bullying and they don't want to go back to school because of social anxiety, normalize that response. Yeah, it makes sense to me you don't want to go back to school. You had a miserable experience last year. That's why I think going to the psychologist will really help you process that so that you can develop tools for when it happens again, because someone will pick on you again. Yeah. And so be able to have those tools to insulate yourself from those stressors is a good thing.
Yep.
And then when you don't need it anymore, you can leave.
Yeah, definitely agree. Where do you see the field of pediatric psychology evolving over the next decade?
Good question. I think really helping to bring together more of that mind-body connection and really helping people to see that it's okay to ask for help and it's okay to use a variety of strategies to deal with that medical issue. It's amazing how many people with cancer and pain and sickle cell and GI issues that I've been able to work with on a behavioral health perspective, and that they've been able to get off medication or had more success with treatment because their mind was in a more stable position. So I see a lot more of that interdisciplinary care happening in hospitals, hiring more pediatric psychologists in hospitals and clinics, because I think it's so beneficial to have them as part of the team. Yep. And then having more individuals come in, more people of color, more people from a variety of backgrounds, so that kids and young adults can see that, okay, I see myself in this person and I feel comfortable with this person. And so I see more interdisciplinary teams, and I see more of an acceptance of this mind-body connection, and that a lot of medical challenges can be met and treated with behavioral and psychological interventions.
Yeah, and that's one of the biggest regrets thinking back to my med school. And I'm coming up on my 10-year reunion this year, and I think they still have this class, but there was a class called Mind-Body Medicine offered in medical school as an elective. I didn't take it, but I think looking back, I wish I would have took that class. I think it would have equipped me with tools to get through residency and fellowship and also medical school, where it's very stressful, and the people don't talk about the suicide rate a lot, but about 300 to 400 physicians commit suicide every year, and I think having the tools, like you said, to just make it through these situations is critical.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that it needs to be in more medical schools, and people need to have more of that experience, because it's amazing how beneficial it is. So yeah, I think that merging of the two makes sense, so that it's just normal.
Yep.
It's just normal. You see the psychologist not because you're crazy, but you're seeing them because that's part of your treatment and part of your care.
Yep. Well, Dr. Lockhart, thank you so much for joining us today. I certainly have learned a ton, and I'm definitely going to be utilizing a lot of the tools that you recommended with my own children and parenting, and I'll share this with my wife, and I'm pretty sure it's going to be beneficial for a lot of other parents out there. So thank you for just giving it your expertise, your wisdom, your knowledge. I definitely appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, and where can people find out about you and learn about your practice, or if they wanted to see you as a patient, where can they find you?
Yeah, so they can find me on my website at anewdaysa.com. So anewdaysa as in San Antonio.com. And they can find me, I'm very active on Instagram at Dr. Lockhart. And they can find, that's the most the ways they can see, so that way they can see what my approach is, all that stuff. And they can reach out for parent coaching if they're anywhere in the world, because we can see them. If they're in the state of Texas, we can see them for therapy virtually or in person. And I have a team of people. So if I'm not a good fit, someone else in the office could be, and my assistant can help them.
Awesome. And I'll make sure I put links into the description for that. One last question for you. If you could give one piece of advice to parents everywhere, what would that be?
One piece of advice for parents everywhere. I would say to be gentle with yourself and compassionate with yourself. Like, don't be so hard in thinking that you need to get everything perfect and right in parenting. It's actually not possible, and it's way too much pressure for yourself. And to be able to know that it's a process, and parenting is hard, because it is. And different stages have different hard about it. And I think, more self-compassion, and not trying to put so much pressure on yourself to get it right every time, because you're not going to, and it's not realistic.
Awesome. Great advice. Thank you so much. And thank you guys for joining in on another episode of the WebMD podcast. Make sure you subscribe, and we'll see you in the next one.